Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. I'm your regular host, Arif, and as always, I'm joined by
your regular co-host, TK.
Thank you, TK. And today we're excited to be joined by Elina Koussis, Global Leadership Development Leader at Maersk, for an exciting conversation about all things leadership development, learning, and we're delighted to have you, Elina. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Lovely to be here with both of you. Thanks, Arif.
Thank you. And to introduce yourself to our listeners, and maybe share a bit about your background, if you can, what you love doing at Maersk and things that you're working on. Then maybe we'll start exploring today's episode.
Sure. So, hello, everybody. My name is Elina Koussis. I have worked in leadership development for the last 13 years or so, and as many years in HR business partnering roles. I've always worked in huge multinationals. I love working with people across different countries. So Fortune 100 and 500 organizations in the energy sector, healthcare, and now logistics and transportation. My passion and expertise is virtual learning, and I love using that to enable colleagues across countries and across different functions to develop. I also have a soft spot for women's development, and I'm very proud of the leadership development program we built at Maersk to enable women to grow in the company and essentially to create a more equitable environment. I'm delighted to be here today.
Amazing. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you, Elina. I'm sure we'll have great fun talking about some of these exciting things that you're involved in.
Indeed.
Normally, as I ask all of our guests when we start an episode, is part of introducing themselves is to introduce, in their views, what leadership means to them. How does it translate to them in respect to the work they do, and what they're passionate about as well. So, would you mind starting there?
It's one of my favorite questions, Arif. So, for me, there are actually two dimensions to leadership. One is self-leadership, and the other one is leadership of others. So I believe that everybody is a leader, regardless of where they sit in the hierarchy of an organization, or whether they have direct reports or not. So it starts with each one of us, leading ourselves, our paths, our development. And I really believe that unless we have taken time to lead ourselves, attempting to lead other people will show gaps. So the second type of leadership as a people leader or, leader of others, I define it as someone that people are willing to follow, somebody who inspires them to want to do their best, somebody who listens and gives time to others to share their questions, their dreams, their aspirations and their dilemmas. And what comes to mind when I was reflecting on this question is there was a program on Amazon with a hospital called New Amsterdam, and the head of the hospital always, when he met his team, was asking, "How can I help you?" And this concept of servant leadership, and I'm here to help you achieve your goals and ultimately the goals of the collective.
Beautiful. I love how you've intertwined the self and then the other as well, and the internal, external aspects. I think the meshing of those together chimes a lot and resonates a lot with TK and I. I'm sure TK will agree with me on that.
I will definitely.
So it's beautiful to hear that, and I'm not familiar with New Amsterdam, so maybe now that you've shared that, listeners may want to take note of
if you like medical shows,
medical shows. There you go.
Yes.
And check that one out. In today's, I suppose, episode, I think going on from there, one of the things that you wanted to talk about was this idea of how to create the right environment space for leaders to either grow within themselves or be better in how they lead others, right? I'm sure we want to look at it from both perspectives. What do you see are challenges that are really, really facing leadership in whether it's Maersk or other corporate settings that need to be addressed right now?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is really technology and the speed of things changing, how disruption, and by that I also mean positive disruption happening, means that there is an environment where it's in constant motion, constant change. So things that might work under, calm and settled conditions will not work in an environment that is in constant motion and change. And therefore, leaders need to have the skills to be able to make sense of what's going on, make decisions, be willing to fail fast, learn from that, bring their teams along, and create the next step for where the organization needs to go.
So do you think, are there particular trends that you're seeing that we need to be thinking about or considering, especially we're partway through 2024 already? Maybe it's different depending on the region of the world you're in, but what are the kind of things you're observing, trends you're seeing that may impact or affect the type of leadership development that you're focusing on, especially at Maersk, maybe?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I talked about the role of technology and how much artificial intelligence is showing up in our lives, and how we need to equip our leaders and the employees in the company to assimilate that in their roles. So use technology to be faster, to be more efficient. On the flip side, I'm going to also talk about more, human-centric trends and challenges, like creating environments that are psychologically safe for people to try things out, to fail, to experiment, to deliver the goals that they are working towards. Also, the importance of keeping diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind, and making sure that we are hiring for that, we are developing for that, and we are using the diversity that exists in our organizations to make as good decisions as we can. Showing accountability and, taking ownership of results, while at the same time you're working with your team to make sure that they have the freedom to apply their experience and their skills. So these are some of the things that come to mind. And
important things. And go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, please, TK.
So I was wondering, because you've mentioned psychological safety, and creating these safe environments is something that we're very keen on. And, we're helping a lot of leaders do that. And we think it's, one of the core enablers. But we've also mentioned accountability for results. And what we've seen is there is a bit of a tension between accountability for results and psychological safety. And I'm wondering, in your experience, how is best to resolve it?
Maybe I'm trying to understand the conflict that you were talking about, and maybe
let me explain, right? So you've got a situation when we are in a team, and as a team we have to achieve a certain outcome, and yet certain members of the team struggle. They find it difficult to achieve this outcome, and it's a clearly measurable outcome. And it might not feel safe for them to speak out, to be a member of a team when they feel they're lacking. So on one hand, safety. On the other hand, accountability for easily and well traceable outcomes creates a bit of a tension, doesn't it?
Thank you for explaining. And while you were talking, what comes to mind is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, where the foundation of that framework is to establish trust in the team. So that's where you can, think, a psychologically safe environment where people feel free to share and to share. I don't know how to do this. I need help. I don't have the bandwidth to do this. I need help. Mm-hmm. Then what comes is conflict. So creating an environment where there is healthy friction, there is debate and disagreement that is voiced. So there is, you avoid this situation where there is groupthink and we all agree nicely with each other, even though inside me I'm thinking, no, this is not going to work. So healthy conflict to be able to surface issues that ultimately are going to help the team. I believe then comes taking accountability for what's happening. So each person accountable for what they are contributing towards the team goal, committing to that. So even if you disagree, you've had the chance to debate something, you had the chance to voice your opinion, and now you are ready to go to where the team is going. And then finally is achieving results. So I'm coming to that continuum in order to, I guess, bridge the gap between what you were saying, TK, with the friction between accountability and psychological safety. So I would approach it like that, following this kind of framework in order to get to the results that we want the team to be achieving.
Really well explained. Thanks, Elina. And it's great to have this discussion on some of these areas or focuses that you're looking at within the type of leadership development you're working on. So thanks for going through some of that. Going back a bit to where we started with trends, what's important, and your focus, I think would be interesting to understand, how are you creating interventions, learning interventions, or how are you creating those opportunities for skill growth in the organization, when I think typically you may or may not agree, I feel corporate settings can make learning opportunities harder for various reasons, because of pressures, because of maybe competing MBOs on one hand, different goals from teams. There's a lot going on in a corporate setting, which I feel may make it harder for people to find the time to get the opportunity to go and learn. So how do you solve that challenge at Maersk?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. And I'd love to hear more about how corporate environments make it harder, because I have completely the opposite view, completely the opposite. So for me, learning is a continuous process. We live and learn, we learn while we are working, and we're actually encouraging this kind of approach in the organization, that when you are working on a project and you need to have a skill, and what comes to mind is I was working analyzing some data for my particular program, and I wanted to do a specific thing on Excel. I didn't know how to do it. I was sure that there is a way to do it, to automate it a little bit instead of me adding manually. So quickly I went to YouTube, I found the video I needed, and I learned that particular skill. So we encourage employees in the flow of work, in the moment that you need a particular skill, to go and look for it. And we are fortunate enough as a big corporate organization to have a library of e-learning courses that people, I spoke about a very specific skill in Excel. If you go to maybe a more advanced skill, like I need to influence somebody over whom I don't have authority, how do I do that? Well, we are fortunate enough to have a whole library of e-learning courses, on-demand courses that you can go and look and educate yourself. So I really believe in this, learning in the flow of work, learning when you need it, go and look for it. So obviously we also have responsibility as learning professionals to let people know, let employees know where they can access learning bites like that. And beyond that, then you have opportunities for learning in the social environment, learning from peers, and then beyond that, in formal situations with courses.
I mean, that sounds great. I love how you've democratized the learning, right? And you've made it open and accessible, and that's important. And I think that's really key. I suppose I don't want to say skepticism, maybe it's too strong a word. But my query is, how do you ensure that? I'm sure you've got metrics of some kind you're looking at to look at whether there is take up, whether there is engagement, people are consuming it. But more importantly, how do you know that it's creating impact? How do you know it's changing, affecting people's way of doing things or thinking about things or seeing the world around them? How do you know that when you're not there and it's kind of distanced?
Yes, and ultimately it's that perpetual. What is the word? The whole discussion around return on investment. I think you're asking.
Oh, Valentin, yeah.
So we're making learning available. We have a talent management system where employees have conversations with their people leaders to decide what development they would need for a particular quarter or year. They access the learning that is available in the organization. And then rather than me as the learning provider, let's say, it's actually the talent management system and that follow-up conversation with a people leader that will show what kind of change in the behavior of that person. So what were they able to apply as a result of consuming that particular learning intervention? So we provide the learning, and then it's a very close partnership with the talent management system that is documented in the organization and the conversation between people leader and employee to understand how that learning has been applied in the flow of work.
I like that there is clear follow-up and that there is clear engagement from management or managers to ensure that that's happening. So obviously that's key. That's closing that feedback loop. But one thing I'm also curious about, because you talk, I remember earlier on in the episode, you mentioned virtual learning is something you're passionate about. And you've described these kind of distanced or e-learning interventions that you offer. How do you blend that in with something a bit more personalized, not personalized, probably the wrong word, a bit more intense, where you may need an in-person intervention, whether that's a live in-person remotely or live face-to-face physically in the room? How do you blend those two? And second part to that question is, when do you do it? When is the right time to do that?
Okay. So how do we blend the principles that we use for our learning solutions in the organization are 70% in the flow of work, 20% through peers, and 10% through formal learning. So in the programs that we are designing at Maersk, these are the guiding principles, so 70, 20, 10. Our programs are virtual, so virtual instructor led. So a live virtual session for, let's say, 2 hours, 3 hours with a lot of interaction. So there is respect for the person who is there and, that they've chosen to be there with you rather than to be doing something else. So a lot of interactivity. So even though we are not physically in the same room, we are still virtually in the same room together. And I'm going to engage you what's going on with a lot of activities to make sure that the content I'm providing is resonating with you, so I can answer your questions live, etc., etc. So that would be the formal part of the learning intervention. And then we also have opportunities for our learners to connect in smaller groups. So if the cohort of the virtual class is, 25 or even in some cases 50 people, we create opportunities for peer learning circles. So we bring 5, 10 people together, mix them as much as we can. So different countries, different parts of the business, and give them some guidance and help them to digest the content that they heard and then incorporate it in their own reality. Because it's one thing for me to give you the concept of, strategic networking. Well, then how do you take it and apply it in your own context? And then, depending on the different programs, we also give them opportunities to work on, for example, in the Women's Development Program I'm responsible for, the women pick a challenging project that will stretch their skills and that will meet a need for the organization as well. And that becomes their focus for the duration of the program. They get support from a coach. They get support from a mentor. So we're adding different ingredients in there to take that conceptual approach that they might get from the live virtual session to personalize it and make it more relevant for their own context and their own environment. So I hope that gives you a good example, Arif. Yeah.
It's a great example, but what really got me interested is when you've mentioned the proportion of your learning in the line of work, your peer learning, and then the formal learning. Other organizations we talk with have much more formal learning, and you have a huge proportion of in the line of work and peer learning. And I'm just wondering, how is this strategy working out for you? Because I find that very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, TK. So I will say this is, formalizing that this is the approach that we are taking is something we've been doing in the last 2 or so years. And so we are still in the process of embedding it across the organization and, making sure that this is the principle that we follow. In general, though, it's something that is appreciated, TK, because it honors the fact that we are learning while we are working. There is always a new skill that you can learn, while you're doing something. And I mentioned that, small example earlier with my Excel skills. So recognize that, and that we want people to constantly learn and constantly upskill, which could take me to a whole, other space as well, this whole space around skills and the importance of not only keeping our skills up to date, but also upskilling, constantly feeding and learning new things. And in some instances, reskilling. So going into adjacent type of skill sets and training and learning skills that will serve us in a different context, for example. So super important to be able to recognize that learning happens all the time and, to act on it. And in some cases, we are inviting our participants to join specific programs. Some of them realize the importance and, they readily come in. Others are saying, well, there is so much work I need to do at the moment. I cannot come and learn. So there is still, we have some road in front of us in that respect.
On that point, you said something about time and not being able to come into learning. When you said to me, you don't know why I would say in corporate settings it's difficult. That's kind of one of the reasons I was thinking of. Yeah, so you've kind of revealed it there. So there you go. But we'll go into maybe some of that in more detail after a short break. I think let's go for a break because I want to talk more about some of that, but also this idea of social learning or learning outside of the classroom. That's really fascinating. So let's take a pause there, and we'll be back in a few moments. Thank you. Our next webinar is coming your way in October. As many of you know, L&D for many organizations is critical to employee well-being and engagement. Despite this, many organizations struggle to prioritize investment, while others consider it an afterthought. That's why we're excited to be joined by Sam Goodman, an experienced L&D specialist, who will be sharing his tips and tricks to secure the investment you need for your L&D team. He'll be walking us through his approach and explaining why it's not all about asking for a budget, but about demonstrating value to the organization. Visit our website homepage to learn more and sign up today. Welcome back, everyone. And before that break, we were talking with Elina about how learning happens in a more holistic manner at Maersk and the kind of things she's passionate about, and some of the factors that may inhibit or support learning happening in different ways as well, which is also interesting. So let's go through some of that in a bit more detail, if we can, Elina. And I think what I'm interested is your ideas on, creating that environment where the learning is kind of continuous. So you're in whether a classroom setting or you're in that e-learning setting, if you will, the virtual one, whatever that setting is. How do you create an environment or culture where me as a learner, I've experienced something, I'm going back to my day job, I'm now back in my desk or out in the shipping yard, wherever it is on the ship itself, wherever my working life is, I must now somehow need to put that into practice, what I've learned. How do you help me do that at Maersk? What are you doing?
So taking what you've learned and putting it into practice, you mean?
Yeah,
Ari?
and yeah, exactly. And how do you create that learning environment to be continuous, where it's not only I've learned something, but the environment is making sure I am also learning while I'm doing. Maybe that's part of that too.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier the library that we have of on-demand learning. So there is a particular skill or a skill set that I need to learn to do better. I can go and consume learning when it works for me, and it's available anytime, anywhere. We are also creating, in the space of specific skills now, we are creating academies per function. So for the commercial function, for the legal function, for the finance function, academies where, again, we have curated content with specific skills for that, for that function. So people can go and, again, access it when they need it. And then through the formal learning interventions that I mentioned, we are creating opportunities for people to be in community of learners. So in peer learning groups where they can learn something. What also comes to mind is the employee resource network groups. So this is networks across the company with that people come together who share a particular characteristic. So more looking at the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. That is also an opportunity for, employees to share experiences, to guide each other. Or I found this article, or I found this course that was particularly helpful, and share also lived experience as well. Because something that we should always remember is that we are talking about adults, and we all have our lived experiences that we can learn from each other. And I was at a conference recently where we talked about the power of learning in a community. And the presenters were talking about, in this hybrid world that we are living in, and a lot of us are working from home nowadays, how can learning and social learning help overcome isolation and loneliness? So creating these communities of learning opportunities for people to come together and share, maybe hear from a more senior leader in the organization, or debate a topic amongst each other, helps with that. And what also surprised me was that in the conference they were giving, it was a Gartner analyst who was giving the example of leaderboards, for example, where you're creating that sense of community. Everybody's learning something. There is, healthy competition. You're using gamified learning, and the outcome is multiple, because not only you have employed gamified learning and made learning fun, but you are also bringing a community of learners together.
That's fascinating.
Different ways of achieving that.
I love some of those ideas, and I think they're new in terms of they're quite cutting edge. This idea of gamifying in terms of using, as you said, or that's pretty interesting. The social learning is interesting as well, where you're talking about learning from each other and peer networks and peer groups. I think what I want to know from that is then how are you measuring that effectiveness, and is it coming through in a very long tail metric where it's very hard to measure, or are there ways that you can get some signals of the effectiveness of that type of approach? Because it's not the same as, obviously, you're there in the classroom and you can know straight away whether someone's understood something or not, right? It's a bit different. So how do you measure that? How do you know the impact?
I think on multiple levels. So at the individual level, I would again point to the employee manager conversation and the performance conversation there. At the team level, you are seeing how the team is progressing. We are all learning new skills. We are applying these skills towards certain outcomes that the team is trying to achieve. And then at the organizational level, is the company achieving the results? Are we making our strategy come to life? When we're looking at our employee engagement results, does that reflect that people are, they're engaged, they are productive, they are happy to be doing the roles that they are doing? So I would look at it on multiple levels in that respect. Yeah.
So that's quite brilliant. And I would like to come back to something that you've mentioned. And I think it's an important one, which is obviously when it comes to hybrid work or when it comes to global working, people can feel like they're disassociating themselves from work, right? You've talked about the epidemic of loneliness. And I'm wondering, myself, and as you said, we do use virtual learning, and I think it's a great tool. But I'm just wondering, what would you say are possible techniques or things that you've seen that really help to build this human connection while you're on these virtual sessions?
One of my favorite topics, TK. So I've been in that space for around 8 years, working remotely, working with hybrid teams. And one of the things that really makes a difference and create that sense of belonging for people is to create deliberate interactions. So whereas before, if you're physically co-located, you bump into colleagues, you've got a brief conversation, you hear about, their part of the business, you can exchange news quite quickly. In the virtual space, that does not happen spontaneously. So you really have, as a leader, for example, of a virtual team, or even as an employee, you need to plan for interactions like that, set up the virtual coffee sessions with your colleagues, or as a team leader, create opportunities for the team that they are able to connect with each other. Always in the beginning of the meeting, take 10-15 minutes and go around the virtual room and find out how are people doing. I remember in a previous team, we used to do that quite a lot. We rotated facilitation of the team meeting, and each person who was facilitating, they would do a nice icebreaker in the beginning, which usually had something to do with what's going on in our lives in that month, let's say summer holidays. or maybe a cultural festival, like, we're going in the winter. Most cultures are celebrating something in the winter. So let's share what we do and how we celebrate. And by doing that, you are creating that sense of belonging in the team, first of all, and then more broadly in the organization, because people can share who they are in a more social setting rather than operational and, job conversation. So for me, it's planning deliberate interactions to give opportunities for people to connect in the general flow of work. When it comes to learning, is again deliberate interactions in how you are involving your audience. They are there to learn instead of do something else. So appreciate, respect that, and in the design of that learning solution, include interactivity as often as every 3 minutes. Give people something to do, to reply in the chat or answer a poll or put them in breakouts. And again, create that sense that we are in this together. We are co-creating what is going on.
Brilliant. And I think I love the techniques. On the other hand, you would say, and maybe I'll be a bit provocative, I do agree with you. I think, these interactions are, especially when they're properly designed, are what they're meant to do. But it's interesting to see that for some people, they still find it hard to interact in this way through the screen. They don't see it as genuine human contact, and they lose attention. And, it's difficult for them to keep at it and keep interacting, and they find it annoying. And I'm wondering, when you see such people, and I'm sure you do, because they are there, how do you bring them in? What have you found, if anything, to help them engage more in this style of communication?
I think a useful technique would be to acknowledge it, to say, I can see that some of you maybe are a little bit distracted. And then maybe give them an opportunity to interact. And for me, interaction is not only verbal interaction in the setting, in the virtual classroom. It's also type something in the chat or reply to the poll. There are time constraints when you are in a virtual learning solution. So having people talk might not be something you can do easily. So therefore, give them something else to do. So acknowledge it, involve them in what's going on. And also for me is setting the ground rules in the beginning and demonstrate that when you say this is going to be an interactive session, from the first 2 minutes of that, live virtual class, do something that gets people involved. Ask them something where they reply in the chat. Ask people to put their web cameras on so we can see each other. There is a lot of research that says when we see each other, we build empathy and we build trust. Also, when we see each other, we understand each other better. I mentioned I work in multinational and global environments where every person has their own accent. So by seeing me, people can understand me better when I speak. So all of these things contribute, and all you can do as an instructional designer and learning professional is you can lay out these rules, you can invite people to join you, and then obviously they have a choice whether they do it or not. And inevitably there will be some people who are super engaged, and you see they reply to the questions, they answer the polls, and others who, are tempted by their emails and they go to their email. So it's an invitation. You lay the foundations, and then adult to adult, you give people a choice how they will engage.
I love that. And I can hear just you describing that and talking about it, how it excites you, Elina, as well. So which was going to be my question, I suppose. What do you, in this role, doing what you do, what do you enjoy the most? Is it actually the putting the stuff together, designing it, putting the experience together so that people can come and enjoy it as you've described? Or is it seeing the reaction of people and how they're interacting with the content and, you know, what you get from that? What is it that excites you the most?
Arif, I will say both. So from an instructional design point of view, there is sheer joy in researching what's going on in the market, what's happening with a particular concept out there, and then filtering it so that it makes sense in the organizational context that you are in. Finding opportunities to challenge that context because you want people to learn. If we're just giving them things that they know and they're familiar with, you know, we're not building much, but also give them a different perspective. So I love that element of learning. And then the joy of being in the virtual classroom and seeing people's reactions and seeing them respond with something maybe you were not sure how it would land with people. It's amazing because that's where you see something that you've grappled with and you filtered it and you curate it for them. It really resonates with them. And sometimes it might mean that they feel really challenged to the point that they get annoyed and even angry with something. Or they like their eyes light up. And that's why I love it when people have their webcams on in the virtual classroom, because then you can really see what's going on, at least for some of them. And so I think definitely both the design and then the facilitation of that solution.
Beautiful. Thank you, Elina. That's lovely to hear. I had a couple of more thoughts I wanted to get across before we end. You at the start you were describing, for example, you're passionate in putting together a leadership program for women, and I'm just curious, in the work you've done, how do you, or what have you observed, or if anything, when it comes to designing something very bespoke for a demographic? Has it made it more interesting, more exciting, more difficult, more challenging in putting something together that works for a particular demographic, as opposed to putting programs or learning interventions together that are more broad-based and applicable across a range of demographics? What challenges and what have you observed in that respect?
Yeah, I think the process is the same for both types, Arif, whether you're targeting a specific audience or a wider audience, because in both cases, you need to understand what that audience needs. Like, why is the requirement for training, if I can call it that, versus something else, you know, having people shadow others to learn, or being coached, or, you know, different types of opportunities for growth. So understanding what that audience needs and then going even deeper. So for example, in the women's program that we designed, we interviewed one-to-one interviews with that particular demographic in the organization to find out what were their challenges, the pain points, and what things worked out. And based on what they told us, we built the solution for them. In other programs, we use focus groups, for example. We are based on the needs that are defined. We are creating prototypes, and we are going and testing those prototypes, you know, let's say half an hour worth of content with a particular focus group to see what works, what do we need to amplify, amazing, or what do we need to narrow down and specify. Yeah.
Really good. That's amazing. I think that's beautiful. It resonates a lot with our work, our views on agile leadership and agility more broadly as well, around user needs. Yes. Yeah, I love that. Brilliant. Really, really good. Lastly, we're running out of time, but last question to our listeners out there, many of whom are in similar roles maybe, or work in L&D functions or in HR departments, or are leaders themselves. With your experience, what is one thing, or two things if you want, you think they need to do more of to bring some of your ideas to life around, you know, social learning and learning outside and making the best of a virtual learning experience, all of that. What is one or two tips you'd like to share our listeners?
I think I'm going to lift it even higher, Arif.
Please.
So for me, as a learning professional, you always need to be connected to the strategy of the organization and what this organization wants to achieve. So whatever interventions will happen, always need to point to that. And we had an example where we started out with a leadership program and a particular focus on a particular topic. And then based on where the organization was at that moment in time, we had to quickly pivot and focus on a different topic, because that's what our audience was ready to listen, and that's what they needed at that moment in time. So always staying connected to the strategy of the organization and the zeitgeist, if I could call it that, where the organization is at that moment in time. And then recognize that, again, we are working with adults and we all have our, lived experiences. There is a lot of wisdom. So give people opportunities to learn outside of a formal learning intervention, learn through peers and share, capture that wisdom and expertise somewhere in the organization.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been a really insightful and eye-opening conversation,
Indeed,
Elina. I've learned a lot. Thank you so much. TK, did you want to add any last closing?
Well, I think, there's so much that has been discussed, and I think the alignment to strategy, but also creating the purposeful moments of interaction, our human interaction, to bring us closer. Thank you.
That human focus. We're all adults at the end of the day, so design accordingly. That's the message from Elina. Thank you again, Elina. We've really enjoyed the conversation, as I said, and we hope our listeners have too. If you don't already, or you haven't already, please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast player. We are producing our episodes and they're going out weekly, so stay tuned for the next one coming your way very soon. In the meantime, thank you again to all of you for joining us. Thank you, Elina. Thank you, TK. And we'll be back soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.